seconds to make sure we're actually recording. And there we are. All right, Dark Bleatings, everyone. Welcome back to another author interview. We have summoned Matthew R. Davis all the way from South Australia today. We made it here in the end after I miscalculated the time difference, but Matthew's very patient with me. He is an author, a scriptwriter, an occasional editor, so I hear, also a musician, amongst other things. So I take it you're very busy. I did read today that you have a couple of awards under your belt and you have been nominated for many for your short fiction. And I knew you first for The Dark Matter of Natasha, which is a novella that I am mildly obsessed with, let's say. So welcome and thank you for being here, Matthew. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm quite fine on this cold winter evening in Australia.
What's cold in Australia?
Well, what is it now? It says about 11 degrees at the moment, which isn't too bad, but it will drop throughout the night. It's not subarctic or anything like that.
11,
probably nothing for someone in England, actually.
I was going to say 11 Celsius?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's quite warm for us. So people would be sunbathing out in that, Matthew. Here, so.
Well, true, but we're traditionally a more sunny climate, so.
Yes, I watch a lot of Australian YouTubers, and it just looks glorious there all the time. I am a little bit afraid of bugs, though. I hear if you go to the outback, that's where the bugs are. So
I wouldn't know. I've never actually been to the outback as such.
Oh, I think I just assumed you all go there. Because it's not like Australia's a big place or anything, and you know.
Well, the outback is like the big empty spot in the middle. It's not entirely empty, of course. There are people and creatures, and yes, probably quite some nightmares as well. But I tend to stick to cities a bit more.
Yeah. People have advised that to me for one day when I finally get to visit it. I do have in-laws out there, family and stuff, and we'd love to go visit sometime. And they've assured me that there aren't just tarantulas everywhere, because that's what you see on television. So.
No, there is a bit of a cliche that Australia is full of poisonous animals who just want to kill and eat you, which is not entirely true unless you count the politicians.
Oh, that's the same here. We have those here too. How strange.
It's an epidemic.
I know. It has to be stopped. Well, before we go on a political tangent, I've been reading a lot of political fiction this week, so yeah, don't even start me. Let's go on to creative stuff instead. That's way more fun to talk about. So I understand that you're a writer of sort of various mediums. So script writing and fiction writing are similar in some ways, I know, and completely different formats, so different processes. And I understand that you're an artist and a musician as well. So can you tell us a bit about the stuff you love? And do you have a favorite of those sectors?
I just want to do all the things, basically, all the things that interest me. I want to delve into. So I started writing at a very young age, at about 7. I actually still remember the first story I wrote, pretty much word for word, because it's only 3 sentences long.
Okay.
And I even included it in the afterwards, my first collection, just as to show you how far I've come, since the age of 7, which is quite a distance. I started playing music as well as a teenager, and then kind of switched my focus to that for a long time. Trying to make it as in a rock band, I guess, and I wrote all the lyrics and most of the music for that. And then I was also the manager and promoter and all that kind of stuff. I didn't really start focusing on fiction until I started winding that up more, so I had more time. I found it less frustrating working on my own because I didn't have to get everything past like 3 or 4 other people who had other concerns and other priorities. As far as screenwriting goes, I've only really written 1 short film that was made, and that was when I was at film school. I've adapted a few things that never went anywhere, and I may actually be tapped to co-write a screenplay in the near future by a friend of mine, and he's mentioned that as a distinct possibility. So I may actually get to live up to that at some point.
Is the script writing I also write fiction, and I have a script that got produced. It was a zombie comedy theatre production, and I was really proud of it. And I was like, oh, this is the start of things to come. But it is way harder to get a script past people than it is to publish a short story or something. There's always a way with short fiction and novels, isn't there? But with scripts, you actually need other people on board. So it's like really hard to like, they're just like, just open the door, let me in, guys. Just trust me. I've got zombies, loads of zombies for you. Cool. So, what kind of musician are you? What do you play? Do you sing? What do you do?
Yes, well, I started out playing guitar and then I moved mainly to bass.
Mhm.
I still play both and I sing. I was the lead singer in my band, and also I play keyboards and theremin and whatever else I can get my hands on.
Oh, that's cool. That's super cool. I'll have to be sure to make sure my brother watches this interview because he's a musician and he composes stuff. And any instrument that isn't like the typical instrument, he's always interested in having a look at. So, if you're I have zero musical talent. I'm the only person in my family that I don't even know that I'm in the wrong key if I sing along to something. I think I've matched the thing. That's what you get for trying to sing along with, periphery and prog rock bands, though. So, with writing lyrics, like, how does that process differ to? Obviously, it's different to writing a short story, but I'm just wondering if, like, the wheels in your head turn differently for something like that.
It's an interesting question actually, because I found that when I started out, I wrote lyrics and I wrote poetry and I wrote prose, and they're all quite distinct from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, they all kind of blended together a bit more. Like my lyrics became a little more literary, and my fiction, my prose writing took on a little bit more rhythm and flow as well because of writing things like that. And when we put the albums out, like I wrote the lyrics out as if I formatted them as if they were prose, proper punctuation and all that to sort of get that point across a bit more. Yeah, and that has definitely played into my prose writing as well. Like especially, always having loved hip hop and stuff like that, I find myself using little internal rhymes and stuff like that, and just factoring out flows and stuff like that, kind of unconsciously, so it has a more mellifluous kind of tone to it.
Mm-hmm. That's
I
really
think
interesting.
I think a lot of writers should really listen to good rappers, anyways, not very plain ones, and learn something from that, and just learn about having fun with words and smashing them together in new and interesting ways without being too overt. I mean, it starts to get a bit wanky if you're doing it all the time, but if you kind of
Yes.
sublimate it a bit, so that it's kind of unconscious, you find little bits of alliteration and internal rhyme and stuff like that coming out. It really affects the rhythm of it, I think, and I think that's one of the things that makes up my voice is that kind of approach.
That's really interesting point about your prose becoming like taking on like a different flow and things. Yeah, very, like that's cool, sort of like transferable skills. Do you write about the same do you like stick to the same kinds of themes in song as you do with fiction, or do you go completely different?
Hey, it really depends. I've written hundreds of songs at this point, although I haven't really been doing it much of late because I've been focusing more on fiction. And I don't really want to complete songs that I know I can't do anything with. I don't want them just sitting there, so I'm playing to a couple of people and like, oh, that's nice. It's like, no, I want to take it out there and do big things with it. So I just am feeling kind of constipated musically because I haven't been doing anything with that. But no, the topics tended to be different. There was still a sort of mild horror focus, and I'd use the occasional sample from a horror film or something like that, although trying to avoid the obvious ones. But no, the lyrics tended to be more well, differently personal, I guess. The horror fiction
Yeah.
is still personal, but I don't know. The underlying theme really of the songs was more like about personal freedom. It was more about encouraging compassion and freedom and stuff like that, and intelligence and difference. I mean, I suppose that creeps into my fiction as well, but it wasn't really like a call to arms like revolution or anything, because I
Yeah.
realized that was a bit, no one ever really actually wants a revolution. They just say that in songs. It's like, what would you actually do if there was an uprising and suddenly these things you're talking about happened? You'd have no idea what was going on. You wouldn't want
Yeah.
to shake up your comfortable world like that. So it was more about just making a point of like, I don't know, I guess trying to encourage that kind of thought and empathy, and also someone's just writing songs about chicks because
Yeah, well, you have to. It's rude if you don't really. You've got to have a few of those. With your fiction, I think that you're very skilled actually at writing stories that do elicit a lot of thought afterwards, because so I'm going to move on to the Dark Matter of Natasha now because I love it, and I read a lot of horror fiction. It's basically all I read, and apparently I read a silly amount of books. It's like my main hobby. So very often, I always make very detailed notes when I'm reading a book, because sometimes there's a month between me finishing the book and then writing the review. So I make sure I make a lot of notes to make sure, because I always think, oh, I'll remember that book. But then if I've read 10 books in between that, I'm like, oh no, which one was that again? So I read this 2 years ago and I still think about it. It recurs a lot, and I have two favorite things about it. One of the sort of themes, I guess, in it is we've got some mental health stuff going on, and that is one of my biggest pet peeves in writing normally. I cannot stand stories that try and tackle mental health, because usually they're written, I feel like you can tell if it's written by someone that has never experienced a mental health issue, or they don't know anyone who has a mental health issue. So that's where I get irritated, because like they can be very tropey. So usually the first sign of something like that, I'm like, oh no. But I thought that you tackled all of this stuff with very blunt emotional honesty. So it was like really hard to read because it was emotional, but it was very satisfying at the same time. It's like, oh, thank God, someone that actually has empathy writing about all these complicated feelings. And the other thing that I really, really appreciated about it is that I've been criticized for saying this. I am not saying ever that men can't write from a female perspective, but there have been many misfires in that department. As I said, I read a lot of horror fiction, so I've read a lot of those, and I thought that I would never have known that a man wrote this, if that makes sense. Like the way you captured certain elements of the female perspective, and again, it's very deep and emotional. I was really impressed with, like, so a personal pet peeve became something I really liked about the book, and I was like, oh wow, a dude wrote this. This is amazing. So yeah, sorry for like the waffling ramble and the gushing about the book, but I just wanted to let everyone listening know, because I'm so fussy about those two things, that this is like kind of a pedestal example of like the right way to do certain things for me. So I guess the really long-winded question that I was getting around to was, how do you approach writing in a perspective that isn't necessarily your lived experience?
Okay. First of all, feel free to gush as much as you like. I mean, we have such fragile egos. We welcome it. I don't get enough of that kind of stuff. And thank you. I don't know. I'll approach this in a fairly long-winded way, so to maintain the theme of the conversation. Good, yeah. The question. So first of all, it's interesting that you brought up the mental health thing, because I actually wrote the first drafts of this story years ago, back when I thought, oh yeah, I'm a bit depressed sometimes, and that was really about it. And it's only really in the last couple of years I've come to realize my problems are actually a lot deeper than that. Mm-hmm. And so I do actually experience serious, well, I don't know about how serious, but mental health issues and stuff like that. And also I learned that I'm probably not as normal as I once thought I was. So that's been a bit of an eye-opener. So it's interesting that came through. Well, I don't know if you meant Natasha's mental health or the narrator's. I mean, Natasha obviously has been through a lot of trauma and stuff like that. And it's really just devastated her to the point where she's sealed so much of herself off. Mm-hmm. And then the main character, I guess, he's just a fairly callow teenager to start with, and then I guess he goes through a lot of things which deepen his character and make him more aware of things.
Yeah, I felt my heart was in my mouth for that character. I thought because he's in a difficult position as well, and yeah, it's hard to care about somebody and not have any control over like how happy they are. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, like a lot of, I find one of the recurring themes with my male characters is that so often they're flawed. Like they don't mean to be a dick,
Mhm.
but they're not perfect and they stuff up, and then that's brought home to them, and they're kind of horrified by things that they've allowed to happen or that they've caused to happen or things they haven't noticed. And I guess that's very much taken from my own life because I've certainly been guilty of that on occasion. You know, as being walking around like oblivious and just not seeing
Yeah.
what I'm doing, and then trying to make amends once I realise that I've actually done something harmful. Um, and that, yeah, that ties in deeply with the theme of women as well. I mean, in this case, I'm not even writing from the perspective of a woman, so it's interesting that you mentioned that it felt real to you. I mean, because these
Yeah.
women are basically they're being seen through the eyes of a teenage male, so that's puts them at risk of being objectified, really. So you have to really be careful.
Yeah, so yeah, I should clarify for anyone who hasn't read the book. So yeah, we're not like first person and female perspective or anything. We've got like a male character and then this girl Natasha. But it was the way I thought that you straddled the line really well between depicting like a real woman with that's going through things, and then at the same time like how she's perceived by this other character, because there's usually a disconnect with like I suppose perception is reality, isn't it? So like the
Mm.
way someone views themselves will be different from the way that somebody else views them. And I thought that um like they were just so layered, these characters. So I sometimes the guy was making these decisions and I was like, oh, but like at the same time I was like, oh, but you like that's an I understand it. And then I just felt very worried about her. So yeah, I think it's just you were very like just honest, I think, with these experiences and the way things happen. I very often read books where there's like a hero character and they just have no bad side. They don't make any. They just undeniably morally perfect at all times, and they never think anything wrong, and they never so and I usually get very bored by that because
Yeah.
I don't know a single person in real life that would apply to. Trying to think of one. No one. So yeah.
No, that's right. I mean, that they don't ring true characters like that.
Mhm.
Not that you have to pack every character with flaws and things like that, but I mean, I think just writing a person honestly, you're going to see different sides of them.
Mhm.
You're going to understand that people aren't just caricatures. It's easy to make fun of people who are different from us, and we do it as well. I mean, even as someone who regards themselves as very liberal, I can fall into seeing people who aren't as being stupid or gullible or something like that, and that's something I have to constantly pull myself back from because no one is that simple, no one is that two-dimensional.
Mhm.
And with characters, I mean, I very rarely write bad people. I mean, sometimes maybe in flash fiction because I don't have to spend very much time with them.
Yeah.
But I generally like to write good people, and sure, sometimes they're a bit rash or they're a bit self-centered sometimes, or they, are harmful in ways they don't really expect. But I want to feel that I can empathize with the character, at least
Mhm.
to some degree. And they don't always make it out, in one piece, or sometimes they do, and they're forever changed by the experience. But I just don't really see much point in setting up a didactic black and white thing where like there's a bad guy and oh look, he
Mhm.
experienced an ironic comeuppance, like in a Tales of the Crypt kind of thing, which
Yeah.
I have done a lot in flash fiction because it's much simpler and it's much more of a brisk storytelling exercise. But for longer fiction, I just don't feel there's anything to be gained from like setting up like an evil straw man and just knocking him down, going, "Ha ha! See, isn't that
Yeah.
cathartic?"
Yeah, it feels a bit like layers of bosses in video games if you do that, which is it's fun in a video game, but if you're reading, it's like, oh, I guess this is the big baddie then, and I guess it depends on which genre you're reading in, I suppose, and the tone of the book. But if you're going for something that's dramatic that isn't also comedy, it's
Mm.
a fine line to tread. Um, sorry, I'm circling back around just to what you said about hip hop earlier. Who do you listen to? I'm so curious. You said good hip hop.
Yeah, well, that's it. Because I'm not to sound old or anything, but modern hip hop. I mean, like I hear a lot of stuff, and it just all sounds kind of the same, and the flows are so basic and so self-centered. There's no real poetry to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think in terms of modern rappers, I mean, Kendrick Lamar is really putting it out there. He's doing something that the more rappers should be doing. It feels more experimental. It feels more poetic, and it's no wonder that he's been so successful. Though sometimes it's a bit surprising, really, that something that's a bit hard to swallow has done so well. But otherwise, I grew up on rappers. I mean, like I started out in stuff like Ice-T and Public Enemy and NWA and stuff. And like Wu-Tang Clan. Gravediggers is a great horrorcore rap album. That's absolutely brilliant. A lot of stuff. I was listening to Stormzy last night. And other English rappers like Dizzy Rascal, Roots Maneuver, you know. I liked and Australian rappers as well. I've ridiculously Catholic musical taste in the old-fashioned sense of the word, and I listen to so many different things depending on what mood I'm in. Obviously, you have to sort of weed out a lot of stuff when it comes to hardcore rap. It's like, okay, misogyny, let's put you over to this side, you know.
Yeah.
Avariciousness, let's just ignore you for the sake of the beats and some of the better rhymes, you know.
I'm not a huge fan of the bitches and bling brand of rap necessarily, but my husband has introduced me to some really weird, obscure, like metal bands and rappers and stuff in the Czech Republic. He was like, "Oh, you don't like rap?" I was like, "No, I've never found rap I like it." He was like, "Oh, there's this guy Watsky." I was like, "Who's Watsky?" And then he was like, let's go on to Harry Mack now." I was just sat there like, what are they talking about? This is like, you know, the subject matter is, I was like, oh, I didn't know that rap existed beyond boobs and, you know, cars and stuff. But that's just me stereotyping because I don't listen to it anyway. So I've just imagined that that's what rappers talk about. So yes, not very versed in that, but I do see the, as I've got older, I've been, I was like a metal till I die when I was a teenager. And at that age, I don't know if this is the same way you live, but you couldn't like anything else if you liked metal in the UK. If you were into metal, if you did say, "Oh, I liked that one pop song," you'd just be outcast from your few of you that had banded together. So I would just go home and secretly listen to my Christina Aguilera albums, and then be like, "Oh no." And I thought I was so cool because I was into Cradle of Filth. That was a time.
That is pretty cool still.
Yeah, I saw them at the Download Festival once, and I had the time of my life. But I didn't feel too elderly to go to festivals. I have to get a fold-out chair now. Can't stand in the crowd all day anymore. My back hurts.
Yes, I saw Cradle of Filth probably was 2009. I saw them. That's the only time I've seen them so far. Though they are here again in September, so I may get to see them again.
That's cool.
To talk about the clicky aspect of things, yes, I do remember when I was like 14 or whatever. I mean, I was listening to hardcore rap, and that was okay to listen to if you're into rock and metal as well, because it was, you know, as when you're a teenager, you appreciate things that make you go, "Oh, I can't believe they said that."
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So that was okay, but then it was, you know, some metal fans are like, "Oh, I don't like that song." It's like, because it's got an acoustic intro. It's like, "Oh, that's a bit too soft." You know, it goes heavy at the end, but I don't know. That just about redeems it, which is a bit weird. And I guess I cared less and less about that as I went on, and I got into more types of music to the point where I was like, I could quite happily listen to really heavy stuff, and I'm like, okay, I feel like listening to Björk now, you know. And people would make fun of me a little bit, but it's like, I don't care. Björk is punk as fuck. I mean, really. Yeah. I mean, most punk rock bands are just like, here's the same 3 chords at a fast beat, and we're wearing shorts. Whereas Björk is like, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, and you are just going to love it.
Yeah, I outgrew my I guess I just wanted to fit in and be cool, and I was very much one of those girls that was like, no, I'm not like other girls. I like Slipknot. Oh, no. And then, you know, yeah, I know it's so embarrassing now, but you know, when you're 15 and there's one guy in school that also likes metal, you just, you know, so embarrassing. Oh God, Facebook memories taught me to chill out, because the Facebook memories from like 12 years ago, I'm like, oh, why did he say that?
I understand completely. Sometimes I think I should go back and just delete all the cringeworthy posts that I wrote, but I decided to leave them there as an object lesson for myself. You know, I've toned it down a bit. And I go on less rants than I used to, which is probably for the best, although the thoughts are still there.
I think the rant phase is quite natural, you know.
And also the things were like, I thought that was funny at the time, and you look back and you're like, no, come on, you really should have known better even then. Yeah, just to cycle back again to what you were saying before, but right from other perspectives. Yes. I mean, while it's not necessarily applicable for Natasha, I'm so stoked that you said that, you know, it feels real to you, that like writing the female characters comes across. Like you were surprised that a man had written it. Like I honestly think that's some of the best praise that I could hear, because I do write a lot of female characters and I have a vested interest in making sure that they feel real. And so when I find out that that's connected with people and it's coming across right, I just feel really satisfied, like I've managed to do it right. Because yeah, like you, I read a lot of fiction written by dudes, and you can tell it's written by dudes. I mean, not just in the way that like sometimes women sort of, you know, they appear and there's like described head to toe, and then you get vestiges of a personality later down the line. But also sometimes they sort of have an attempt at writing something that's more conscious and it sort of falls over itself. So yeah, I just pay attention. I've always paid attention. I've always enjoyed the company of women, female artists and stuff like that. And I always feel like I've been better grounded in that, whereas a lot of dudes almost like consciously or unconsciously kind of cut themselves off from that, and they focus more on male artists, and I don't really get the other side of the story, which has become increasingly important to me over the years.
I think the thing, so I know a lot of like great male writers that write good female characters. It was just that the depth that you went to here, I was like, don't know, I really connected with the characters and stuff, and I just really appreciated how you worked everything in. And I think that I think that especially over the last few years, I think it's ever since that Twitter thread of like men writing women badly. Did you see that? It was
I've seen it, yeah.
Oh gosh, it was so funny. And I think that the point of that was just sort of like, initially I think it was like light teasing about men, you know, like, oh, she walked down the stairs and the boobs were boobing boobily, and yeah. It's always women are always very aware of their boobs for some reason in these books. And it started off a bit light, and then for a patch I just saw bless them, just male writers getting absolutely thrashed in reviews if they got anything a bit wrong. And I was thinking, oh, on the one hand, yes, surely you all know women, so you could ask them. But then on the other hand, some things are like just misunderstandings that you don't even think to ask, to check, because you just think it's a thing, you know what I mean, like relatively harmless stuff. So I think that there might be a little bit more pressure on male writers if they're writing female characters than there is on women writing men, because I don't see it nearly half as much with women getting dragged for inaccuracies, and I'm not really sure what that's about, if people just don't notice or if it doesn't happen as much. I actually don't know. I'm wondering.
It doesn't seem to happen as much, does it? You don't see as many say novels written by women with male lead characters as you do male written novels with female lead characters.
Yeah, I just don't know what the I don't know what the sort of proportion, like the percentage with that is. I'm actually now wondering, like, have I ever written anything really stupid, like as a male trait that isn't actually a male trait? Usually I just try and base my male characters on people I know in real life, and then I feel relatively safe.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, sometimes you do read male characters and it's just like, I don't know, it feels almost like character assassination. It's like, here's a male character. Yes, he's a douchebag. And it's like, look, yes, I mean, like, to be fair, we kind of brought that on ourselves because a lot of us have been douchebags. And it feels like right to sort of take a bit of heat back now, you know, after having sort of had the upper hand in the conversation for so long, that people turn around and being like, you, sir, are a twat, you know. I mean, fair enough. We can all own that a bit, you know. But obviously there's a more nuanced way to deal with characters, because we're not all like that. I mean, you know, well, I'd certainly hope not.
I would say that most of you aren't. It's just there's a few bad apples, and it's you know, unfortunately, just if there's a drama or something's kicked off, it sort of poisons the well for everyone for a minute, and then you got to move on. But I'm always being made to look like an idiot, because a few months back I wrote an article about my experience of being a woman in indie horror and going to conventions and just being in, like, because it's quite male dominated. There are obviously women that go to horror conventions and things like that, but the the split is quite uneven. There's a lot more men, I find, and at book conventions as well, funnily enough. But the article was about how safe I feel with my male writer friends and how I feel like they're just different collectively to like your average group of men. And I was spouting off all this stuff about, oh, maybe it's because they're writers and so they tap into this empathy, and maybe they think in like, they try and relate to women a bit more and stuff. And then every time I've said something like that publicly, 2 days later, they're like, oh, this guy was going around sharing everyone's nudes. And I'm like, oh, guys.
It's not your fault. Didn't bring it out. It was already there. But you know what? You're right, because that's the way I feel too. Like, I think, how the fuck does this happen? Like, you're a writer, mate. How do you not have more empathy for people? How are you not more open-minded and just more kind? But it's just a dudes that seem just completely oblivious to more refined reality or morality, and just oh yeah, I'm a writer, and then they turn around and be a misogynist tool. I don't understand that.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, I think the king of that for me was not a writing necessarily, but I've forgotten his name, Roman Polanski. I was like, how does a guy that makes Rosemary's Baby, and it's so sympathetic to like a pregnant woman and all of you being gaslit by everyone around her, like how does the guy who directed that end up being like that?
Yeah.
That's so bizarre to me. So weird.
I know he played it off as like, oh, I was grieving, as kind of one-off thing, and it's like, well, it was like 8 or 9 years later, and she was like 13. I mean, yeah, I don't think that explains it.
Very bizarre. People are just very strange. I generally, if there's sort of like writer drama, I know people might have an opinion on me for this, but I just sort of like head in sand. Because I just think it gets very heated online, and I'm like, I'm afraid of weighing in, because like, what if I don't have the whole story?
Yeah.
Weigh in and really strong, because I used to do that very often, and then sometimes I'd be like vehemently defending someone, and then it would turn out that they'd done the thing, or I'd be siding with someone that had actually made a thing up. So I just don't know what to think anymore.
No, I don't really want to comment unless I have a lot of information, or unless it's pretty clear. It's not like I don't have an opinion, but sometimes I just don't feel the need to add to it. Like, I see a post and I go, okay, so it's got 83 comments. I don't think I really need to chip in here. I think that's probably being covered by other people. Anything I was going to say has probably already been said anyway.
Yeah, I think if I see something really heinous, I might not be able to stop myself from jumping in and be like, hang on a minute. But generally speaking, in my head, I blacklist people, and then I just keep my thoughts private about it and just try not to associate with them ever again.
I think that's fair.
Do you do conventions and stuff?
Not as much as I would like. I was about to mention this anyways, because my experience at conventions and stuff like that is probably a bit different to yours. Well, obviously it is. I mean, being a male, I don't think I've ever felt unsafe anywhere, being 6.5 foot tall, dressed all in black and having long hair. I've been fairly safe in that regard. Look, being like a gentle giant is kind of like a privilege in a way. But I mean, in my experience, conventions and stuff here in Australia, there's a much more even balance. There are lots of women there in the industry, and writers and stuff like that, and they're all totally lovely. And all the guys are too. I mean, in my personal experience, I mean, there's the occasional sort of little niggle or something you hear about, or like someone's falling out or whatever, but there's been no drastic reports that I can think of in the scene. And it's a very harmonious place to be. I mean, sometimes people don't like each other necessarily, don't like each other's work. And certainly there are some people who are like better as people than as writers. But, when I go there, I do feel very embraced and welcomed. Yeah. And I really appreciate my fellow, spec-fit people in that context. I've been to the Aurealis Awards a couple of times the last couple of years. My partner and I went over for those. And see, that's another thing. Like, she's been really accepted as well, because she's a visual artist. She's a photographer first and foremost. And she's, I mean, like she met my writer friends and stuff, and they took to her straight away. And now she's moving to doing book covers and stuff like that as well. And that's been really well received. So it's really cool to be able to bring you into it, and everyone's just instantly, oh, okay, you're one of us. You know,
Yeah.
there's no sense of like, oh, you're a wag. You know what I mean? Also, like, you're not like just here because he's here. I mean, like, she's come along to support me, obviously, but now she's integrating more into it. You know, it feels a lot better knowing that that's something we can share and that we can collaborate on things. And I'll be saying, oh, I was talking to Karen Warren today, and she'll be like, oh yeah, love Karen. Like, she knows who she is. You know, things like that. It's really, it makes you realize how far I've come in a way, and how far she's come too sometimes.
Creative household you guys have. Like, you've got a lot of skills between you. That's so cool. I find this with metalheads as well. Horror fans and metalheads, nicest people you'll ever meet.
Oh yeah.
So my, mums being mums, when I first started going to gigs, I think my first ever gig was Slipknot and Slayer. My mum was so
in at the deep end.
I'd never even been to like a local gig in a pub or anything, so that was like my first one. And my mum, bless her, was so concerned because she was like, because she'd seen, I'd watched, back in the day when I used to watch Scuzz, because that was the music that's all day every day, just heavy metal. And she'd seen Slipknot and was like, are you going to be okay at this gig? And then you get there and everyone's like, oh, sorry, did I bump you? Unless, of course, you go into the fray willingly. But like, if you're getting knocked around and you don't want to be there, someone will generally pick you up or save you or help you.
Absolutely. That's mosh pit etiquette. Someone falls down, you help them up straight away, no matter who it is or what. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've never seen a fight at a metal gig. I've seen fights break out at other shows, but metal, it's a community. We're there for the same reason. We're there because we love what's going on. It's like you walk up, you see someone wearing the same kind of clothes as you or whatever, or something to broadcast their love, something you're into, and straight away you're like, friend.
Yeah, if you see, I love it if I see somebody wearing a band t-shirt when no one else I know, like none of my friends have even ever heard of the band, and then you just see someone randomly at the gym or something, and I'm like, and you like, I just feel like I want to be friends with you now. Yeah, I think gigs and just any horror events really. I think maybe the like the male female split is so skewed here just because the conventions in the UK are very small. So I have American friends that go to the Scares That Care and things like that in the States, and I know that those are enormous events. Like, there are loads of authors and people will turn up with like little trolleys to like house all of the books they're going to buy and everything. Over here it's like it'll be in a little hotel and maybe there'll be 150, 200 people, and that's a lot. And there's like, you see the same faces at everything because like everyone goes to the same thing. So maybe it's just number of people, like law of averages, because there are fewer people in the UK than the US or whatever.
I mean, I have to travel for these events usually. Like, I'll go over to Canberra for Conflux or Alice Awards, or like I wanted to go to Continuum again this year. That's in Melbourne, but we've got so much going on right now, it just wasn't feasible. But here in Adelaide, I mean, there's actually really nothing going on in terms of a spec fic scene. I mean, like, there are a few notable authors and friends of mine, but in terms of events, you don't really get that. So that's why when there's a meeting of the mind, so to speak, I have to fly interstate to join it, which means I have to plan ahead and I have to save money for it and stuff. So it becomes a whole thing. I can't just pop down the road and meet 200 horror fans and writers, which is unfortunate. And of course, I've got a couple of friends who are at StokerCon at the moment. So seeing all their posts, I'm like, oh, damn it. Could I possibly afford that next year?
Have you ever like met one of your idols in person?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, I've met a few musicians who I admire, but never really had a conversation with them. When it comes to writers, I mean, meeting people like Karen Warren for the first time and just being immediately accepted as a peer was fantastic. And I met Ellen Datlow last year at Conflux, which was cool. We didn't really interact personally very much, but we were part of a lot of group conversations and stuff. And at the end, when she realized I was leaving, she's like, "Oh, bye," and come and give me a big hug. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I've never met her, cool. But I'm a fan. I know her work, and she's like a big name. People are always talking about her and her like anthologies, and that's a skill, being able to put an anthology together. I've worked on one, and I did not know the background hell of trying to decide the stories, and you've got like 30 amazing stories, but you can only fit 11, and you're just yeah, actually weirdly enjoyable in hindsight, but not at the time.
Sometimes you need a bit of perspective before you can see what was good about it. Except at the time, you're just like, oh no, I have to like break the dreams of like 19 people and say, sorry, better luck next time.
Do you know what was worse? It was a themed anthology, so inevitably we had and like if it's a themed anthology, everyone will try and think outside the box, like outside the theme a bit, and inevitably a few people will have the same good out of the box idea, like a similar thing, and we had like a few. Like we had like 3 or 4 that were all so good and we wanted them all in, but they all used the same weird little thing, and we were like, we're gonna have to just pick one of those. And that conversation went on for hours and hours. Like, which one?
I guess the point was like, you know what? Write them down on a piece of paper, put them into a jar.
Yeah. I was like, I don't want to send rejection emails to any of these. They were all really deserving of the book. Let's just do a part 2, 3, and 4. Just keep doing anthologies until you can include all the stories you liked. Can we talk a little bit about non-fiction? So before we started recording, I mentioned I recently read A Vindication of Monsters, which is a lovely collection of essays about Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft, and obviously there's a lot of Frankenstein talk, and then just other aspects of Mary Shelley's work. How did you become interested in a project like that? I'm so interested to know how you like heard about it. And
well, I know the editor, Claire Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
So we're mates. We bumped into, well, actually, I bumped into the first time at a convention about 6 years ago in Melbourne. She's a very colourful character, very interesting person, and quite a good writer. And I saw that she was talking about this anthology she's putting together, and she was basically asking people for pictures, I guess. And I thought, well, that's something different. And me being me, I want to do all the things. So I'm like, okay, that's something else I can do. So I pitched an idea of writing about Mary Shelley in pop culture, in fiction, like fictional versions of Mary Shelley herself popping up, because I thought that would give me a bit of room to move and a lot to talk about. And of course, it would give me a few chances to talk about Doctor Who, as I'll do at the drop of a hat. So I pitched to that. She said, sounds great. And I wrote it, sent it to her. She's like, yeah, sounds great. Gave me a couple of tiny notes about it. And I just tweaked it and sent it back. And then we had to wait a while for the book to come out, because I think it changed hands. It was going to be published. I think it was going to be self-published initially, and it was picked up by IFWG and was given new artwork and stuff like that. And I'm quite impressed looking at the TOC, how it all turned out, some of the authors that I'm sharing some space with.
It was wonderful. I think it was Claire that actually emailed that to me as a review request. She's like, I don't know if this is your thing because it's non-fiction, and I was like, please, I love horror related non-fiction, and I've hardly ever sent anything. I guess if you're doing non-fiction work, I guess they approach people who tend to review non-fiction as standard. So I think I get like overlooked, and I'm like, please send me all of your essays about classic horror literature and writers. And Mary Shelley is a really interesting person, like basically in every regard. So I was like, that was a really educational, awesome read, and I was really impressed, because you would think, I assumed before I started reading it, quite unfairly, that it was all going to be about Frankenstein, for the obvious reason that that's like her most famous work. So it was a really nice, pleasant surprise to see like everyone just wrote about something different, about the same person. I was like, wow, this is. So yeah, if anyone's doing an essay on Mary Shelley, you need this book. This is the one. This is, if anyone listening needs a study aid, this is it. Do you write?
And that one's shortlisted for a Stoker Award as well, so that's done fairly well for itself.
Yeah, and rightly so, because it was you could tell that all the essay, like all of the contributors, like you guys were clearly like really enthusiastic about what you were writing about, and it made, so I didn't actually know much about Mary Shelley at all, beyond that she, basically invented sci-fi on what some people consider a week-long bender. So I knew that, and that she was young when she wrote it, and I didn't know a lot more, really. So it was like, and now I was like, I closed the book and I was like, I'm so knowledgeable now. Ask me anything.
She was a woman of many sides. And I read a lot of non-fiction works and stuff like that to to prepare for the essay, to take notes and stuff like that, because I thought, well, I'm only aware of a few things, but let's see what else she's popped up in. And I searched further and further afield and read books about the creation of Frankenstein and things like that. And just seeing her from all these different angles is quite interesting, the way she's become like an archetype in a certain way, you know.
Yeah.
You can totally see why. I mean, like, if you view her in a two-dimensional sense, she's like this total like mad goth queen, you know. I mean, like basically created horror and sci-fi fiction in the modern sense, like on a whim in a few days, you know, when challenged by men to do so. And then had these kids, and then like carried her husband's heart around in a hanky after he was cremated and stuff like that, and lost his virginity to him on her mother's grave. Apparently, it's like, wow, okay.
Yeah, she was an edgelord. Maybe she
Well, she backed up though, unlike most edgelords.
Do you have you written a lot of non-fiction besides that, or?
Not a whole lot. I've written a few essays and guest posts here and there that have been published. I do actually have a non-fiction book coming out at some point. It's about music. Well, it's actually about The Cure, probably my favorite band of all time. Sorry, definitely my favorite band of all time, despite being like metal through and through. It's all about The Cure for me. So I've written a book. It's about their music and about every album and every song. It would have actually come out probably 2 years ago, but then they went and said they're releasing a new album. So now I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and occasionally emailing the publisher and like giving some updates and be like, well, I heard that they had done some more vocal work on it. Well, I guess we'll wait and see. So that one will drop at some point. And that was a real labor of love, but it was really interesting doing that, going down the rabbit hole, because I thought, I'm a mega fan. There's nothing you can tell me about The Cure. And I was so wrong. There's so much I learned about the songs and everything. So it was really cool.
You'd get on great with my husband, because he if he gets into, he does it with the bands and artists he already likes, but if he finds somebody new, he like deep dives, and then a month later he knows everything. He knows like and sometimes it's really cool if it's a band that I like, but sometimes if he suddenly decides, so during lockdown, for example, all of a sudden he was like, I don't know anything about the Beatles. And I was like, oh no, no, please. I don't mean to piss anyone off with this, but I thought, please, no, not the Beatles. I don't know why, but they sound just irritates me. And I told him that, but he was like, listen, you don't understand this sound, because they don't just have one sound. And then he proceeded to educate me for weeks. But, I do actually feel better for knowing all of that stuff, because it is actually interesting when you start looking at it. But have some conversations.
I mean, my partner's a big Beatles fan, and that's something that doesn't come between us. I mean, personally, I've always just felt a bit put off because everyone goes on about them so much. I'm like, I don't need to join that cult, which is a bit of a weird kind of way to look at it. But, they're not going to miss one more fan, and I do appreciate them. It's just not something that I listen to for fun. Yeah. But I do the deep dive thing as well. I mean, at the moment, I'm in the middle of a Deaf Heaven phase. Like, I had Sunbather and I only heard it a couple of times, and I pulled it out and listened to it, and I'm like, wow. That's actually really cool. And I listened to it more and more and more, and now I started picking up the other albums as well, so I can look at the evolution of them and stuff, and just really getting into that.
That's so cool. I don't tend to deep dive as much, but that's because normally I just don't have enough hours in the day, so I've got to I have to pick which thing I'm interested in the most, and it's usually something bookish, like I'll be reading instead. But for some reason, I did go down a Final Fantasy soundtrack rabbit hole for about 3 years, and because there are a lot of pieces, and I just really loved those games up to a certain one, and I've always wanted to go and see the Distant Worlds concert, but I've never got tickets for that. But I'd love to see those played live, and I enthused about this to someone, and they called me a nerd, and I thought, well, that's fine.
That fits.
That's fine. That's fine. But yeah, I listen to metal, but I never deep dive. I can never even name all the songs. I usually have them just all on shuffle. And then, when people go, oh yeah, well, if you're a fan, name their first 3 albums and every song in order. And I'm like, I couldn't tell you. I just know.
Gotten that way for me too, because I've got so much music. I mean, I have a truly ridiculous amount of albums. Mm-hmm. And after a while, you get a new record. I used to sit there and read through all the lyrics while I listened to it and remember all the song titles and stuff. And these days, no, I'll just put on the album as a suite of music. I remember the album title and I remember some of the song titles. But when my head is already jammed with so many pointless facts. I don't need to memorize track lists anymore, you know. So sometimes, no, I don't know the name of half the songs on a record, but I recognize it when it comes on.
Yeah, I miss the days of when you buy a new CD and you immediately pull out the little booklet, and I always had to with half the metal bands because otherwise I didn't know what they were saying. And I used to just lie and say, well, I understand what they're saying. Maybe you're just not metal enough. But really, I'd be in my room like, oh, that's what that word was.
Sometimes you're like, I kind of wish I hadn't read the lyrics now. Thank you, Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, I really enjoy it when you find out, like, you know, I'm 37 now, and every now and then I still find out that I've been singing the wrong lyric for 20 years when someone goes, what did you just say? That's not what they said. And I'm like, I've thought that for most of my life. For literally 20 years of my life, that's what I thought they said. But it'll just forever be that in my head, though, if I'm conditioned now. Too late to change it to the correct lyrics now.
No, totally. And it's understandable with some singers too. I mean, like Vince Neil, for example, like I got big in Motley Crue was like the first rock band I really got into when I was a teenager. And I didn't understand what some of his lyrics actually were for a long time because of the way he stresses the words.
I don't think that he knows what he's saying, especially these days. I saw them at Download Festival as well, and it was one of their farewell tours. I don't know if it was their actual last one, but it was their last one at the time.
It was at the time, I guess.
And I couldn't believe the audacity, right? I had friends that were all of a similar age. We were all 80s babies, and they were all really ripping me for being so excited about Motley Crue. And I was like, how dare you? How dare you? I don't care. I'm going to be down. And I was, you know, I'd had some drinks and I was there dancing away next to my fold-out chair. I actually stood up for them. And I don't know what I was singing. I think I was just like, you know, the sounds, it's whatever he sounds like. I was a little bit overly impressed by the flaming bass guitar. But, you know, the words spectacle, that's a word, isn't it? It just didn't sound like a real word as I started to say it. I'm a writer. Listen to me with all my words.
So look, I'm doing a Shakespeare. Okay? I'm inventing new words. I'm going to add at least a half a dozen before I die, and you're going to pick them all up and you're going to use them, and I'm going to take credit for them.
Yes, exactly. I am a marginally more demented than normal because at the time that we're a few weeks ahead of when this will be posted for anyone who's listening. But at the day that we're filming this, I have just finished a ridiculous reading challenge that I, for no reason, set myself to read 63 books through the month of May. And I succeeded.
At the cost of your sanity.
Yes. I really haven't slept more than 3 hours a night for like at least 10 days. And nothing sounds real anymore. And I think I'm at least 80% caffeine now, but it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Read some good books. We'll never do that again, though. I will just keep ahead of my review requests from now on, I think. And with that being said, feel free to send me anything that you'd like a review for, Matthew, because I welcome any and all of your works. Well, sorry, that was a horrible segue. That wasn't even a segue. I did have an order of things I wanted to ask you, and we've gone off on a tangent on everything we've said so far. So I've gone a little bit off book. What was I going to say to you? Do you have things like influences, like horror influences that aren't actually horror works?
Yes.
Go on.
Oh, I have to explain myself. Well, I read pretty widely, so a lot of stuff feeds in that is not even remotely horrific. Because like you, I read almost entirely horror, but I mean, I do like to branch out, and I read like a bit of, you know, fantasy, SF, crime, comedy, lit fic, whatever, and then like obviously all kinds of unholy combinations of those. But like one early influence that I've been delving into a bit more lately, because I am going to write a story for a tribute anthology. I mean, no guarantee it'll get in, but I'm going to give it a crack anyways. So I came prepared. I have books next to me. So I'm reading Vivia by Tanith Lee. And she was someone I started reading when I was about 15, and that made a big impact on me back then. The sensuality of her language and the stuff that she did. And it got quite dark. And again, mostly female characters, and they're fairly complicated people too. Sometimes they're unlikable or ruthless.
Mhm.
And then the pungency of her prose I found inspirational. So that's an early influence. It's not really horror, kind of maybe dark fantasy, I suppose you'd have to call it if you had to call it anything. But that definitely crosses over enough to count. That's
Yeah,
just
that's
one example. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's a British indie author called Kit Power that did a series, My Life in Horror, and he was just
Yeah.
talking about the things that influenced his horror leanings, and half of the things were nothing to do with the genre. It would be like a random song or like a cartoon or something. And
Yeah.
it's interesting how those things filter in and get you thinking. I think I always say to people, Return to Oz was mine, but I would very strongly say that's a horror film anyway. No one can convince me that that's not a terrifying children's horror film.
It is pretty full on for kids. Yeah, I
Yeah,
get
Mombi
that.
with a missing head. I have never recovered from headless Mombi chasing them. Um, and then it's a very jarring film. And the
That's
gnome
one of the
king.
things you keep coming back to is like, oh, what if there's someone and they could like swap heads? And I think, hang on a second, that sounds very familiar. And then I
Yeah.
realized that's been echoing down through my life this whole time.
Yeah, some things just trickle, like stay in your subconscious. Do you ever get like really good ideas and then when you're so far in, you're like, wait a minute, this wasn't my idea. I've seen it somewhere.
Not usually. Sometimes I'll come up with an idea and then later before I start writing it, I'll realize that someone else has done it. Or sometimes after I've written it, someone else will co-opt it and do a much better job. I mean, one of my earlier publications was a fairly straightforward kind of stalker type story written in first person. And it was written many, many years ago and it was published, like 17 years after I wrote it and I'd stopped giving any thought. But in the interim, like Neil Gaiman had done something very interesting along the same vein, featuring like a living statue, like a street performer. And I read
Oh
that and
yeah,
thought,
yeah.
well, like that's just completely trumps what I did. Mine sounds so mundane compared to that.
It's I hate it when that happens when you're really happy with something and then you realize something similar. But it's just I think because I don't know. I guess because a lot of us read like there are some staple authors in the genre, and if we read like a lot of us read those, like Stephen King's a staple, Clive
Yeah.
Barker, um, and so I think if we're all reading similar works, like sometimes maybe we're influenced in the same types of ways, and well,
Hmm.
everyone puts their own spin on it, but you have like a similar pool of like inspiration.
Well, yeah. And another thing that I just remembered. So I'm a big Ramsey Campbell fan. Have been since I was a teenager. Right, just love it. And one of the few people I could say, yeah, that's a clear influence on my work. But years ago, I had this idea. I like this novel that I'm still working on at the moment. And there was a scene where they're going to be in like a abandoned derelict building, is covered in graffiti and stuff like that. And then someone like spray painted welcome over the lintel, and then like some bird crap had like fallen over and covered the L, so it said "We come." And I thought that's a brilliant idea, great visual, game to use that. And then I'm reading one of Ramsey's recent books, and bang, there it is. He'd used it first. I'm like, well, fair dues, you can have that one. You deserve it.
Well, I mean, he's been writing for so long now. There's just unlikely that he hasn't cut. There's probably nothing he hasn't covered. Like it's like no stone unturned. Um,
That's it. All kind of toiling in his shadow to some degree.
yeah, I love Ramsey. When I asked you earlier if you've ever met any of your heroes, it was because I don't know why everyone else seems to be able to behave like a normal person, but the first time I met authors that I loved, I really embarrassed myself.
You
I
probably didn't. Probably just think so.
No, no, no. I assure you that this was a memorable for all involved. I met Mick Garris, and I grew up on his films. We were quite big, into the Stand miniseries and Hocus Pocus. Critters 2 was quite the staple in my house. And I had all these
Big time.
questions I wanted to ask him. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna ask him all these really intelligent questions and just, mine him for like cool information and tips. And I almost cried and just waffled about the critter ball. And that was it. That's all I talked to him about. And he very graciously was like, oh, I'm glad you liked the critter ball. I gotta go now. I was like, God. So that was a fun time, and hopefully he's completely forgotten about me. In case I ever meet him again. But yeah, that's basically the standard story for me. If I meet an author, I'm really excited about it. I'm okay like via the internet, but the second I'm in an in-person event, it took me days to approach Ramsey, and I had like books I wanted him to sign, and I just couldn't even go up to him.
I understand the trepidation. I mean, yeah, I've thought about reaching out to him too for professional reasons or whatever, and it's like, well, I really want to do that, but I really don't want to make a fool of myself, and I don't really want to impose.
He's lovely.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. And
that's the thing.
I almost met him too, but I didn't. So at least I didn't embarrass myself then. He was going to come over for a con about 10 years ago or something like that, and I was going to go for that reason, and then ended up having to pull out. So he didn't go. But it was weird because like one of the guys who was there, who organised it, and who later I got to writing books for his anthologies. His name's Steve Dillon, and he was friends with Ramsey as well. And like he would get Ramsey reprints for his book, so I'd be getting published alongside Ramsey. I was like, but he was there, and another guy was there from Adelaide who I later ended up meeting and then living with for a couple of years. Another sort of horror freak. So it was interesting that they were there and they met, and I would have been there.
Yeah.
If Ramsey had been there, so I would have met both of those guys years sooner than I actually did. Small world.
Well, he's very approachable. I could tell you from experience. He's just a lovely, like, when I asked him if I could interview him here on this channel, I just assumed that the answer would be no, but I thought I'll shoot my shot. You know, you don't ask, you don't get, you never know. And he was so lovely. And I thought, like, when he was like, oh yes, that sounds lovely. I was like, oh, does it? Oh my God.
Well, writers do like a bit of publicity and they like the chance to talk about their work. So frankly, we're a pretty easy mark.
Yeah, I think I just assume that the more successful you are and the longer you've been in your career, the less you like need to do like the marketing side yourself is what I assumed. But yeah, he's just lovely, and I just wish he was my granddad.
Well,
he's just the coolest guy.
Yeah. But we don't do this for the marketing, I'm not sitting down and going, okay, I'm hoping to bump up 3 points after this chat with Kaylee and like looking at my sales or anything like that. I really don't expect it to have much influence there at all, but I do like the chance to interact with people in the scene and talk about my work and the work of others and just generally feel a part of things. So thank you for asking.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I obviously, like as you know, I'm a fan of your work anyway. And the second it occurred to me that I was like, wait a minute, I could do author interviews. And then I was like, just started writing down authors I'd love to speak to, and the list was, I still haven't even reached out to like half the people on it because there were a lot. And then I posed that question on Facebook, and a lot of people were messaging me with requests for authors they'd like to see. And I'm the same as you. Any excuse to go on a podcast and just get to interact with other people, it's always fun, especially if it's people that are on a different continent, because we're all so far away from each other in the world physically, but it's quite nice to still share like a space and a community. And like, I guess the horror community is big, but also it feels small. Does that make sense?
Okay. We don't walk around in clumps. Like you might see groups of metalheads walking around. You don't usually see clumps of horror fans walking around together in little gangs or anything like that outside of events or screenings.
Yeah. Yes, it's not exactly the same as Comic-Con, is it? Like those are huge events that run every day, and you get so many people at those. Like, yeah, the horror stuff and the writing conventions are even smaller than the general horror ones. So we don't assemble very often.
No, well, I think also it's a bit more of a steep learning curve. Like you can watch a couple of Marvel films and be like, I'm going to go there and I'm going to dress up as Captain America or Miss Marvel or something like that, or Captain Marvel or something like that. But I mean, you're not going to go like, okay, I've read one Stephen King book, I'm just going to like go to a convention and cosplay as Carrie or something like that. I mean, you kind of need to be more versed in it, and people are going to know if you're not. I mean, they're not necessarily going to harry you out of the room with flaming torches or anything, but I mean, I think we have a good nose for authenticity. And it's not like we don't gatekeep or anything and be like, you can't come in unless you've read these 3 books by these authors or whatever. But there has to be a genuine sense of connection, of commitment, I guess. And then once that's there, if that's obvious, then by all means come right in. You're one of us straight away. Until you, send people's nudes to each other, or like say something horrible about sexual abuse, or like, you know, manipulate people.
Why is it always stuff like that?
Why is it always men? Yeah, I know. I don't know what it is. Everywhere you look.
Generally a welcoming bunch. This is such a weird thing to cite as a reason I love writing conventions, but I feel very accepted in these places for things that other people consider weird about me. So I generally do not drink alcohol at all because I get really severe migraines. Like, it's just a severe migraine trigger, and it took me years to work that out because I thought I was just getting hungover, and then I realized that I was like, oh no, it's not a hangover, it's a really bad migraine. I've gone blind in one of my eyes, and I was only 2 sips into my first drink. So how did that happen? And then, yeah, that should have occurred to me earlier. So
not a hangover.
Yeah, it's just really, really not worth it because I will be horribly ill, have to lie down, and I'll miss like 12 hours. I've got to take really heavy medication and stuff. It's just so painful. And for some reason, if you don't drink and you go anywhere where there's a bar, people just will not accept that you don't drink alcohol. In the UK, I think we do have a bit of a binge drinking culture here.
Oh, we do here as well. Don't worry.
It's bizarre to me because if it's any of it, I have never ever been approached by someone who's like, oh, do you want to do some cocaine? And they go, oh no, thank you, I don't do cocaine. And they've never been like, put it up your nose. Like, not that I'm always approached by people.
What? You haven't lived yet.
But you know what I mean? It's just like alcohol seems to be the exception as far as drugs go, where you're like, oh no, thank you, and people are like, oh here I got your Pepsi with a vodka in it. I'm like, why? Please, I'll be so ill. But I don't find that. There's just a weird little thing about writing conventions. I am always the person walking around with a tray with a little teapot on it. I just drink tea at these things, and that's like my go-to. It's like, I'll see, we'll have a nice cup of tea. And people know that about me, and people sometimes just buy me cups of tea. You know, like when someone does a bar run and they come like, I didn't know what you wanted, Kaylee, for your tea, and I'm like, oh, that's really nice. Thank you for not trying to buy me a Guinness or a pint of whiskey.
Well, that'd be a pretty bold move to buy someone a Guinness if you don't know what their drinking habits are. I'm going to assume that you like this tar. You know, I mean,
just the UK, honestly, that's just not unusual. Very strange.
Well, Australia does have a very entrenched drinking culture too. I mean, we're very much known as people who like a beer or 6 or 12, and that's fine. I've been a heavy drinker for big portions of my life. I mean, not quite so much these days, just because there's not as much scope for it. You know, I've got things to do. I can't be wasting half days because I feel like crap and just want to lie in bed and eat chips. But yeah, there's definitely that. I understand how seductive it is. And look, when I go away, when I went away to Conflux last year, I mean, like, yeah, the Friday night and then the Saturday night I was there, I always ended up in like a series of bars with other writers and just socking them back. And it's great. And having that really loose conversation, you know.
Yeah, I do miss I would like to have the option. I just really can't. So it's like when everyone else is a little bit like, you know, everyone's a little bit more social and they've relaxed and stuff, I'm still a little bit like, I am not, like, once everyone goes past a certain point, I don't understand what anyone's talking about anymore because I'm stone cold sober.
Or maybe it's time to reconsider cocaine.
Yeah, you know, there are other. Oh, I don't know why I didn't think there are other options. Not legal ones, but you know, that never stopped anyone. So I don't know how we got onto that. Let's talk about. I've already kept you for like just past an hour, but I did want to ask you. I will release you soon from this obligation. But do you have a piece of your own work that you're like especially proud of that you would like to have more readers for?
Obviously, I'd like all of them to have more readers. So it's a bit hard to pick. I mean, I write in different forms and different lengths, so I don't know. I guess I have to say one of my own books because it's easier for people to get their hands on rather than like buying an anthology for one story or something like that I quite like, you know. I guess in some ways, I mean, skipping past Natasha and then Bite Size, which is the most recent one, which is a flash fiction chapbook. I mean, I'm really happy actually with my first novel, Midnight in the Chapel of Love. That one just feels very substantial to me. Like, it feels like it's got a lot to say about masculinity and things like that, even if I'm not entirely sure what it is actually saying. But I mean, it's very much a male story in that, like, it's all from the perspective of one character for the most part, and then a couple of others topping and tailing it, even though women are basically at the center of the story, as is usually the case with my fiction. It's a way of exploring, like, the way this guy runs away from his problems and then has to face them again, and the way he sort of fights off having to admit things because he's worried about how they're going to play out. And it's not like a full-blown horror novel. It's one of the biggest influences I cite is Picnic at Hanging Rock, because it's kind of got that sort of ineffable nature, cosmic horror kind of underpinning, you know, and then there's this sort of social drama layered on top, and then the cosmic horror kind of keeps bumping against the bottom of it, you know, and creating a thread. And I was just, yeah, I guess a lot of writers will puff up their own work and say how much it means to them, and, you know, in all cases it will be true. But I feel like that one was pushing at the boundaries of it, I guess. I mean, in that, like, it's sometimes feel like it barely qualifies as horror, and horror fans will be like, no one got eviscerated in the first 30 pages. This is shit, you know. And look, no one gets eviscerated at all. But it's not always about that. It's like, I think the ending of it leaves like it chills me a bit to think about the implications of it, of what's actually happened. And interestingly, I gave a copy of this to a psychologist when I started seeing it, because I thought this might help you to understand where I'm coming from a bit, you know, insight into the workings of my mind. And she came back to me and said that one of the main characters she thought was a narcissist, which I'd never considered before. So that's an interesting perspective.
That is
we're not expected to empathise with her too much, so it wasn't that much of a shock. But I was like, oh, okay, like, I knew that she was brash and selfish and all that kind of stuff, but I never realised that people would see it as being that bad. But people take different things from it, you know.
Yeah, it is interesting sometimes, like, your take on your work and then the perception by others, and everyone will have a different opinion over, like, the same piece of work. So, like, I love reading reviews. Whenever I finish a book that I really enjoy, the first thing I do is go and look at 1-star reviews of it. Like, something I would consider a 5-star book, and I always love to see why people hated a thing that I loved, because everyone's got, like, different takeaways. So I'm not, like, precious about reviews for my own work, apart from trying to get them, because, as you'll know, that's quite the slog. trying to get your review numbers up, it's very hard. It can be, but what the reviews actually say, obviously it's really nice if you get a good review, but I don't, you know, it doesn't bother me if someone's like, I just thought this was shit. But, well, thank you for writing the review anyway, because especially on Amazon, it's the number of reviews that actually help. So and if you have nothing but 5-star reviews, it just looks like your close friends and family are the only ones who read it. So,
or you pay for a bunch of bots to do it for you or something. Yeah, it looks a bit suspicious if the opinion is universally glowing. Also depends, if you look at what other people read, if they post a negative review. I mean, I've luckily had relatively few of those. That might just be because I've had relatively few reviews in total. But there was one anthology that had one of my stories in, and the guy went through and rated them all individually, and mine was the only one who gave a D+. And, like, the others got, like, up to A and A+ and stuff. And I was like, wow, okay. But then he wrote that he basically didn't understand it.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was pretty straightforward. And then looking at other stories he gave an A to that I thought were actually average at best, I thought, so that's the kind of stuff you're into. You're not going to get my kind of stuff. So I don't actually take that personally, you know?
Yeah, I think it's taking it personally is a bad idea. I think that when you start getting more mixed reviews and, like, your average star rating goes down to, like, 3.5, that's when you know that your book has got actual readership. It's getting a bit further afield, and it's all good. I felt really sorry for it was a brand new, like, a debut author. They'd released one thing, and they were ranting in the Books of Horror group on Facebook. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but it was something to do with a review, and he'd, like, screenshot and posted a review with the person's name on, and he's like, they just didn't understand my book. And I was like, oh no. I was like, someone tell him. That's not the etiquette, don't do that. You literally asked that person to review your book.
People are not obliged to blow smoke up your ass, you know. I mean, they should speak the truth. And I'd rather someone says, look, I tried it, it wasn't for me, or I didn't like it, here's a number of cogent reasons why. than just go like, oh, it was great. No, I can't tell you a thing about it, but I assure you it's great. Or just to not care about it enough to have an opinion to start with.
Yeah, I felt sorry for him because I think he just didn't. He was completely new, like completely new to the whole indie thing. I don't think he was even aware that like the reviewers and authors mix that much, like where they'd even know that he'd seen the review and what like. But I was like, if you send review requests out, you have literally asked someone for their opinion, so you can't like react like that when they give it to you.
No, otherwise you might as well send out a review and just say like, can everyone just put their name on this and agree that I'm the best thing since sliced bread, you know? And what's the point of that?
Yeah, I know. I do feel uncomfortable if I didn't like a book if it was by an indie author that I know. But I'll still do it, but I'll just say like, here's what I liked, here's what didn't work for me.
Yeah.
I just try and be honest and fair about it, but I do feel uncomfortable. But that's, I wanted to review books, so that's the nature of that beast.
Well, that's true. But you know, I occasionally get requests to read books for blurb purposes or whatever, which is still relatively new to me and like pretty awesome. Or like just people ask me to read it and give an opinion on something like that, and I'm always a little leery because I'm like, well, what if I don't really like it? What do I say then?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's best just to not to say anything, or or to like admit that sometimes you're just too busy to get around to everything that you might set out to do. Because I don't want to upset anyone. Which is not to say that I don't know. That's a very cowardly thing to say, really. I suppose avoiding confrontation, but I mean, it just seems pointless aggravation sometimes.
I think it's just because you're a writer as well, so you know how much work has probably gone into a thing. So if you feel a little bit more reserved about being like, well, that's a pile of crap. Not that you would say it like that, but yeah,
No.
I always feel I'm like, oh, I didn't like it, and I really wanted to like it because now I got to say I didn't like it. Sorry. But I haven't been, no one's come for me on the internet for anything like that yet. So I think people are reasonably well adjusted about these things. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Are you working on something currently that we can look forward to?
Yes, actually, just while I was, before this, actually, I was doing some editing, and then when the notification popped up, it actually startled the hell out of me because I was in the zone, and suddenly this loud noise, like people's and it was you like opening up the chat. I'm editing a short novel at the moment, which is actually the novelization of an independent horror.
Cool.
So again, doing different things. So the film is called Rib Spreader. It's an Australian feature-length film. It's basically a trash exploitation film about a guy who used to be a cigarette icon, and now he's driven crazy by a sentient cigarette mascot and runs around killing people and taking out their lungs to make a suit. So it's pretty over the top. And I was the writer-director is a friend of mine, and he's a notable figure in the local punk community and horror community, organising horror film festivals and stuff like that. And I kind of inveigled my way into this production by being an extra and a friend and stuff. And then I pitched him the idea of doing a novelization, and he agreed to it. So, and I've sent him an earlier draft of it, and he loves it. And I've like shaped it a little bit. Like sometimes dialogue doesn't work as well on the page as it does on screen, for example. Or sometimes I want to delve into things or refine things or just bung in a few jokes of my own,
Yeah.
Because it's rather tongue in cheek, obviously. And he loved it. So that's going to come out as a book hopefully this year. It will have the novelization and the screenplay that he wrote, and another short story as a bonus that I wrote from his notes.
That's amazing. Oh, cool. Keep me updated about the release of that, because as someone who has done a few years of mascot work, that is right up my street. I was never a cigarette, but like an ostrich. But yeah, that's such a good idea. I would like to see the film also. That's great.
Yeah, it is available for streaming, I think. So have a look around. Like I said, Rib Spreader.
Rib Spreader.
Pretty full on and gory, although not like massively so, really. But it's pretty trashy and pretty punk. And so that's going to come out through a local publisher who's kind of like got punk roots, because we wanted to sort of keep it on that level,
That's cool.
I also have another short story collection coming out later this year. Another 13 stories, most of them previously published. That one's coming out through Journal Stone, as my first novel did. and I'm currently currying favour with people to get blurbs at the moment, sending off to friends and people like that to get some feedback and hopefully get some nice words I can put on the jacket. And then there's that other book, the Cure book that I talked about. But that's really dependent upon Robert pulling his finger out and finishing the record.
Yeah. Yeah, come on, Robert. There are people waiting on you with projects. You. Well, that sounds cool. That's that they yeah. I'll really look forward to that novelization of the short story collection. Yeah, that's going right on the list immediately. I have one more question for you.
Yes.
Very serious. You'll be judged on your answer.
Oh, okay. Do I have time to revise?
Yeah. Do you know what this is?
It's a purple people eater.
No, it is not. So this has turned into somewhat of a running thing with my interviews. I asked someone once as a joke, like it was like a rapid fire round of questions, and they didn't know, and then people were curious about it. So now this is how I end every interview, and so far no one has known what this dude is. I am offering a prize to anyone who's watching this. Who can identify this, but don't cheat. It's just if you happen to know it. When we stop recording in a second, I will tell you the secret, but you're not allowed to tell anyone. Sworn to secrecy.
Right. So I was worried that you were going to say the answer had been given at the end of all these episodes, so you could always tell if someone had actually watched any of them before or not. So now, if you'd seen my previous interviews, you would have known that that's Franklin, the purple rock monster with one eye, you know.
No, you're allowed to be in the know once you've seen it, but you're not allowed to share this information with anyone else in case I interview them. So,
all right.
Yeah. Once again, any people watching this in the chat, if you know, let me know, and you will win books probably. I got many a signed copy of things that I can give away to you fellas if you know. Okay, I think I'll release you. I've kept you a bit longer than I meant to. Sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
Hopefully I can get you back for a part 2, maybe when your next release comes out. Maybe we can do a little promo. That would be good.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much for doing this. I've had such a great time talking to you, and I'm sure that anyone who watches or listens will enjoy it as well. People usually have a few comments and questions. I'll let you know if anyone approaches with anything. But yeah, I really appreciate you doing this. It's been fun.
No worries. I really appreciate you asking, because I don't get many requests like this. So it is always a pleasure to speak to someone who is earnest and educated about the genre and has some interesting questions to ask, and is just, nice.
Oh, well, I'll try and get someone like that for the next one. You just had me today, sorry. Okay, so if you hang back, I will, tell you the secret of the dude. But yeah, for everyone else, we are going to say bye.
Bye. Be well.
Now, awkwardly find the button.